My name is Isla, and I'm a junior consultant at Turner and Townsend, and we're joined today by Louise Hyde, who's also from Turner and Townsend. This is a retrofit information support and expertise or RISE event, which is fully funded by the Department of Energy Security and Net Zero and delivered by Turner and Townsend. Thank you very much, Louise. I will hand over to you.
Thank you, Ayla. So welcome everyone. Thank you for joining the session. So my name's Louise and I've worked directly in resident engagement roles in the past for retrofit, more kind of on the field poverty side. So this has been as a project officer at the National Energy Foundation. We go to sort of libraries and community groups. People could bring their bills and went to sort of food banks, talked about energy, and then worked at Portsmouth City Council as well and did lots of resident engagement, going out to events and so on, and sort of bringing that experience to this session. So thank you for joining us. So really today we're going to be covering the importance of resident engagement, sort of methods of communication, and how you can develop engagement plans and how to kind of overcome any common obstacles. So we're going to begin just talking about the importance of it and why it matters. Essentially, to me, this is really, well, at the end of the day, people are involved with every single part of every retrofit project you will do. And if they're not on board, you could end up with, millions of pounds of funding and struggle with obstacles to deliver it if people aren't happy. There's your council of your housing provider or even a supplier. There's your reputation as well. Thinking about how that might impact a resident's life if something goes wrong in their home. The knock-on effects can, have problems with remedial works, even just their health and well-being in the household and socially as well. These works as well, so if you're doing a government funded scheme, you'll have to comply with PAS 2035, in which case it can be quite different to some other retrofit works in the past where maybe a surveyor can go out and do a survey and install, the next day, and it's sort of just minimal consultation and engagement, whereas the PAS process is actually a lengthy process. You do have the assessment and then coordination and design and install and handover. So it's not just a sort of turn up and have the install, it's a long process. Essentially, it's just a really important part of getting them on board so that everything can go smoothly. As well, if you do have any issues, it can obviously add on to your budget and that can delay the project. So you want to be ahead of everything, anticipating any resident concerns, access issues, handover issues, ventilation requirements, to help your project go to time and to budget, and prevent any sort of change requests and so on. So what can happen if it goes wrong? There's different types of poor resident engagement. It could be that people don't sign up in the first place, a low sign up rate, but you could also get high dropout rates. And they both have very different kind of causes and mitigations and treatments. So that's something to consider as well. It could also just mean you have issues with maybe turning up to site and there's unexpected items that you haven't considered, and that's maybe because it hasn't been discussed enough, or appointments are cancelled, or they don't know. Often an installer might go out to the property and they're ready to, they knock on the door and they say, well, we weren't expecting you, or we didn't know about this. Lots of things that maybe you've been through this yourself as trial and error. I've definitely contacted some residents and learned a lot of lessons about, they really want to be consulted early doors and have that information first. I think you've got to be really considerate, that there are also a lot of scams out there as well, which people can understandably be very nervous of. So you want to make sure that you're doing everything you can to make sure that your messaging and your branding is very, trustworthy and legitimate, and give customers time to consider things. It can also just, it could lead to you having to abandon the property, move on to another one and replace it. This can then mean that you've treated a whole street, but one property's missing, or a block and one property's missing. And then you'll have to go back at future project stages. And often the way funding can work is, you're doing that project for a fixed time. sometimes residents don't want to have the install for some reason, and then they see their neighbour get it. I think it's also it could lead to sort of hopefully not damp and mold issues, because that should be considered by the installer at that stage. But yeah, poor sign up rates, dropout rates, and it can add resource and budget onto your project that you've not maybe planned for. And yeah, the wider long-term impact, if you're planning to get to net zero by 2030 or so on, if you've got a journey and a mission to sort of complete, you've got to think about how the different waves of what your projects are doing and how that may impact the other parts of your project. So now we're going to be looking at what you need to consider. So that could be who the residents are, what you're consulting on, what you're engaging with them on, what are the timescales, how are you going to be consulting with them, what are the methods, what are the timeframes for this, and what does success look like for this project. So is it a high sign up rate? Is it a low dropout rate? Are you doing a customer satisfaction survey? Is it actually due to the lack of complaints? Or are you going to go back and do a post-works monitoring and evaluation exercise and understand that as well? So this is everything to think about. So just really why, what, who, how, all the sort of main questions. You can also learn some lessons from previous funding streams, and you might have done this yourself and be conducting lessons learned exercises. We've got some examples here. It's really about using your resident liaison officer or a tenant liaison officer to provide that holistic support. So maybe you're going in, you've got funding for a retrofit project, but you're actually able to offer them referrals to other schemes. That could be, anything from disabled facilities grant, or it could be, adult social care or occupational therapist, could be a wider holistic support for the household. And we've got another example here where you're able to sort of look at the aesthetics and performance of a home and further engagement. So you might be doing like a kitchen fit out or something of that nature. Like you might be tying it into a capital works program, re-roofing or kitchen refurb or something. And then understanding why there are refusals in previous funding streams. So I think sometimes it can be to do with ventilation requirements, that maybe this is not understood, making it clear early doors that that's a requirement of the scheme, or even just have not understood that or have not communicated that the PAS processes can encounter quite a few different visits. It's a lengthy process. It could also just be it's not the right time for that person. They could be on holiday or sick or have family visiting or some sort of other personal circumstance. It could be mistrust. They might have had a bad experience with the previous landlord. They may have had a bad experience or heard rumors, or, people talk. There can be like resident Facebook groups and things, and understanding. People can understandably be a bit nervous of scams and things. And here's an example of refusal of saying, the anger and frustration hasn't happened overnight. Sort of threatening with an injunction if you refuse to let them in. So there is also things like the Section 20 and things like that. But I think what you want to do is really avoid a stage where things have to go to, these formal processes. I think it's in everyone's best interest to have really good engagement with your tenants. Everyone's got a key interest in that. So there's also types of ways you can break the whole customer engagement process into different stages. So you might do this in different ways. There's different ways you can do this. You might align to the PAS process, which we're just about to go into. But this is an example here where there's 7 stages, I think, there. And starting with the engagement, going through to sort of raising awareness, launching the scheme and designing the scheme installation itself, then the handover, which is part of the PAS process, and any post works. So this can be quite a good overview for how you can start to plan out what do I need to do at each stage. So this going back to the what, how, and methods of communication. So for each stage of this, just planning through what roles need to be involved. So do I have a tenant liaison officers? What information does the customer need at this stage? So the early stages, if you've just been awarded funding or you're about to start with retrofit assessments and so on, it could be that you send your initial letter out saying, hi, so and so City Council or have just won funding, and we plan, we've just awarded our contractor as XYZ, and we plan to be completing our surveys in the autumn period. So please be aware of future contact of this. So that's probably the first stage, maybe to send out a letter. Quite often you will note yourselves if someone calls you up and says, you know, I need to come out for the survey, the first thing that that tenant is probably going to say is, well, I've not had a letter about this. So I think sending a letter with your organisation's logo is a good first step. And also just to bear in mind that anyone, they might be nervous of the letter as well, making sure that's legitimate. So it might be good to include like something like, and you can view this on our organisation's website, because that now allows them to then provide another method where they can go and verify that this is actually a legitimate project. So they've then had one method being the letter, the second method being that they can check that the website matches up with what you've said. So they're already starting to build that trust. So that's a really good first step, is to send out your letters. It's also quite a low cost thing to do. You know, you can do mail merge for your addresses, and actually it's usually quite a low cost thing to do, that although you don't want to fatigue anyone, if you do need to send another update, sending that letter can be a really good way, a time effective way of doing that. You know, obviously should cover all methods of communication, but you know, calling every single person with the same information could be time consuming, where sending out the first letter is always could be a good idea, and then you can follow it up with additional methods or suit it to as and what the household needs. Raising awareness, so this could be, you know, reducing dropout rates to do with either them not understanding what the PAS process entails, not understanding like ventilation might be required, or maybe not understanding some technologies such as heat pumps, just myth busting things about them, you know, thinking about the common concerns like, are they noisy? Am I going to have no heat in the winter? Other things might be that explaining who the contractor is and so on, thinking about every common question that an FAQ, what a customer may need to know, like who's responsible for it afterwards, am I going to have to pay anything, how do I maintain it, you know, once it's installed. And these are usually the main questions, are usually do I need to contribute anything, and how will it be maintained once it's been installed. But yeah, awareness of what the measures are, what the PAS process is, ventilation may be required. I'd also say just being clear that you might not be able to guarantee any specific measures. You know, you can't maybe say we guarantee this is going to be that you'll get this measure if that's not the case, because customers then might think, I'm going to get that measure, so I'm going to apply, and actually it's not until they've had the survey done that determines the measure. Moving on then, yeah, just understanding that there's different roles, different processes. So in PAS, you'll have a retrofit assessor, coordinator, designer, and the installer, and so on. So understanding that there could be different contacts as well. The installation itself, how can you minimise disruption to tenants? Thinking also about accessibility and what suits them. So not everyone will want to do you know, like a Monday to Friday 9 to 5, or they might have different needs and times that you'll have to accommodate for. Thinking about minimising disruption, so you could maybe provide, you know, for example, if you're doing work in like room for a bedroom, you might need to think about how's the resident essentially going to use their property for their everyday life, work, sleep, and so on, and what are going to be your alternative arrangements if it's disrupting their everyday life, and how can you minimise the period that it's disrupted for. Handover as well, you don't want to go to all that effort and install all these fantastic measures and realise that the resident doesn't understand how to actually use it. It's really important because you're going to do with PAS, you're going to have to do the monitoring and valuation to ensure that you've achieved the intended outcomes. And if you've not achieved the intended outcomes, it will be sort of why is that not being achieved? And so the handover is really important. And the handover, we're going to go in. Oh, post-work, post-work, you need to do the follow-up. So that will be considering that as well. We are now going to go on to this slide about PAS. So these are requirements of government funded schemes such as the Warm Home Scheme, and you can see here that one of the main principles of PAS is to make sure that the well-being of residents is considered. So we've kind of got an example here. You do have to provide a handover to residents, and there's also an example here which states that all retrofit advice needs to be delivered in a form that can be understood by the occupants. So taking into account language, age of occupants, and any hearing or sight difficulties. So these are types of things that it's not just a nice to have, these are actually stated in PAS. So please do consider this in your project. And you can see here, these are the stages that you go through as well. So there are 6 main stages, and you can see here on this sort of blue bit, the handover bit and the handover advice. So this is where you've got to provide resident advice, but also at the very start, you've got engagement advice, and you will also set intended outcomes of the scheme itself, and that might be things like we intend to get to EPCC, or we intend this or that. And then at the end, once it's been installed, you will do monitoring and evaluation to see whether that has achieved the intended outcomes. So yeah, really important. Please do, if you're not familiar with PAS, and it is good even if you're not necessarily the installer, is still good for everyone involved in the project to be quite familiar with PAS. And it might sound a bit OTT, or maybe you don't want to read the whole document, but really there's some great it's really good to be familiar with that document. It's PDF, you can download it for free, and it's good to be familiar with, and anyone involved in the project, I would really recommend reading through it. Now we're going to move on to who the stakeholders in your resident engagement might be. These are always really good discussions to have within your organisation as well. So organisations, you could have organisations to do with, you might have your local branch of Citizens Advice, Age UK, or other sort of charities which have their local branches. Could be adult social care, occupational health. A council's typically going to have a disabled facilities grant as well, so whoever operates that scheme. You may have a private sector housing team. Thinking about hard to reach, as well. So how are you going to engage with everyone? I'd also really recommend, we're going to get into it in a minute, but there's field poverty, demographics and data, and a lot of the recent field poverty data does actually show that those who are most at risk of field poverty are actually like single parents and children under 5, or households with children under 5. So that's really worthwhile considering how am I going to engage with school groups, sort of tailoring my engagement and advice to families which might be busy going from school to an after school club or childcare and so on, and to and from school and things. How can this be accessible to them to engage with, because you're going to have a different approach to one group to another. A comms team, like a marketing team, that's really important as well. They'll advise you on this. People call them different things, but you'll normally have like a resident liaison officer or a tenant engagement officer. You might have what else have we got here? Yeah, your contractors as well. If there's anything else not mentioned there, think about who right now as you're sort of attending this, think in your head, who are my stakeholders. So you'll have local organisations. If you're a council, they might have all these different teams internally as well. So just thinking that through. People, so just what can be the approach be? Putting people at the heart of your resident engagement strategy. You should hopefully have, a tenant engagement strategy and journey mapped out, with roles assigned to this and some time costed to it. I would say, make sure that you've also considered any residents who might need extra time and care, and that's going to cost into the project to allow for that. Tailoring your approach for each resident. Yep, we all learn in very different ways, particularly if you're doing a handover on like a heat pump or something, or explaining some heating controls. It's to think about it in your own house. If someone came in and just really quickly, they're kind of in a rush to get out the door, they're saying, yep, this is how it works, this is how it works. Quite often, it's quite hard to take that information all in. It's going to be quite overwhelming. And you might want to give that information before and after, like a follow-up. And, before is good because then if they've got any follow-up questions, they can then ask you at the visit. And also a reminder is really good as well. So just to make sure that when we learn in different ways, someone might take it in verbally and other people like to see it written down. And just accommodating for all basis, really. Yeah, being clear, being upfront about things, getting to know your tenants, so that it depends on your organisation, but obviously the more you know about them, the more you could then recommend other things and kind of treat them holistically and have that personal approach. So hopefully we all agree that's a really good idea, and you might already be kind of doing that, but hopefully there's a few tips in there as well. Yeah, so example here just about the fuel poverty data. So we've got some data that's published in 2024. It's worthwhile also, in addition to the PAS reading, is having a look at this and thinking about how can you be aware of this in your local area. So you might have local differences, and you can maybe look at things like the IMD data and other types of data. But you can see here that single parents have the highest proportion of households in fuel poverty, and then the highest couples under 60 without children had the highest average gap. So I would probably it's worthwhile bearing things like this in mind when you're going out and doing the different types of approaches. And you can see here proportion of households in fuel poverty, single parents being the highest, and then thinking about how you might tailor your approach, really. And it might be different locally as well. And age of the oldest occupant, proportion of households in fuel poverty, and that's quite a high in the 16 to 24. I suppose they've not actually got under 60 there. But yeah, so bearing in mind single parents, families, how will you tailor your approach to all these different groups? And then kind of slightly linking to what we've just discussed as well, but there's all the different areas of support, so the kind of themes as such. So it could be health, how can you have posters up in the pharmacy? Some of you might have GP referral routes already in place, but whether you can set that up or not, it depends on your situation and your local environment, but at least some posters, leaflets and things at the GP is a good thing. You could offer to do training with them with the winter coming up. We get into the heating season as such, where the fuel poverty and fuel vouchers and things. Doing some refresher training can be really good at this time of year. Probably start to hopefully you've engaged with them already, but if not, trying to book it in for, let's say, early September onwards is a good idea. Occupational therapist, so this can be someone's trying to be discharged from hospital, but they go out and do an assessment of their home and it's not safe for them to return to because they don't have any central heating, or the heating isn't suitable or in some way, that can create a lot of issues. Bearing in mind, and so maybe it can be worthwhile engaging with your local occupational therapy team, doing some training and raising awareness of what you can offer. Bearing in mind that a lot of these roles, they are going to be really, really busy just trying to do their actual job, and that you want to make it as simple as possible for them to just make that referral. So have like a really streamlined route that they've done their bit, they've referred someone on, and you pick it up, because they might not have time to really go into a lot of detail. The hospital discharge teams, yes, it's a similar thing, is really just is understanding really holistically in a health capacity what might be basically treating the root cause of something instead of the symptoms. If someone keeps going back to the GP because they're unwell, is it actually, and they just keep giving them, a prescription for something, actually what they really need is a warmer home potentially. Education, again, going back to those fuel poverty data and things, how can you engage with families, bearing in mind that if someone's taking their kids to and from a club, they might not want to stop talk about energy or insulation at that time. So can you get some marketing and things that makes it really engaging, that their kids can be, entertained and occupied with some like energy games while you have a conversation with them? Because it can be so easy for people just to say, I don't have time for that right now. I think we all kind of do it at times. We just think, I do need to talk about that, or I do need to fix that, but I don't have time right now. Make it accessible for them. And then, yeah, making sure that if you can have like training routes and conversations with schools about signposting to your scheme, making sure they're aware what support's available. Council tax, there is often a really huge barrier with GDPR benefits and things as to how you can make sure the people who could really benefit from support can actually be signposted properly to what they might be eligible for. There are GDPR barriers, but one thing, yeah, I suppose you could consider whether anything could be featured in a letter. If you've got council communications like newsletters or council tax newsletters or council monthly newsletter or something to tenants, it could be worthwhile seeing if you can feature in it. Thinking about hard to reach audiences, and that could be that they're not as mobile, they live in rural areas, they're not like sort of familiar with tech, or they don't have a smartphone. Maybe they just need more support, anything really, or there might be sort of a language barrier. Thinking about how you can accommodate for all these groups. So really, it's just about providing extra care and consideration in your project as to not just a blanket one stage fits all. If someone does need extra support, what are you going to do? Thinking about how someone who is less mobile and doesn't maybe go to community events, how are they going to hear about your offer? Governance, so I think wrapping it all up, so I suppose that could be, yeah, the HHSRS private sector housing teams, how can they be aware that if they're going out to the property and doing a report or a survey, that they're not just going out and then not referring on to you, that they know what your service is. I'd also probably would add, just off the top of my head as well, like, money being a sort of section on here as well, if people are in energy debt, needing advice, that could be another link to how you can provide support. So now we're going to move on to methods of communication. Now we're going to talk about the methods of communication that you can do. So different methods, we're going to go into sort of digital, print, face-to-face, so you can be letters, social media, and so on. But really what you want to think about before we go into the different methods is what you want to cover, what the message needs to entail. So thinking about equality, diversity, and inclusion and accessibility is thinking about this before we move into each format. And you can see here, I hear and I forget, I see and I remember, I do and I understand. So thinking about all these different learning styles that you might encounter. So digital, you can use your social media formats and podcasts, having some videos, this is something to consider as well. You can actually do, paid for social media campaigns, which can be quite an effective way to do that. I think you can push it out to certain postcodes and things, and then that could be a format. It can also open yourselves up a little bit as well to feedback from tenants. They might comment directly and say, it's something like, oh, I wanted to do the scheme, but I heard this X, Y, Z. That, although can provide you with that feedback loop as well as to how you can actually then address any of the comments and concerns. You can actually use that to sort of think, okay, what's going on here? How can I improve this? So that's one thing to consider as well. I think what we want to do is cover all bases, so maybe not just digital, but using it in conjunction with other things. So printing letters, really cost-effective way to send out sort of welcome, we've won funding, we're going to do surveys in the autumn, sending kind of batches of letters. It could be really effective to track as well. So really simple like mail merge functions, and then you can track which postcodes you've sent them to, which has had a good uptake, which has been successful. And that's also important as well, I think, just when we're talking about this, is to really track if you're putting all these comms out there and doing all these different things, how do you know which is the most successful, or what's been working, or what has the conversion rate? So just to kind of note that you've put letters out to, I don't know, postcode, let's say, I don't know, Cornwall, postcode 1 or something. And what if they all reply, but the other postcode doesn't? And can you pick up the fact that maybe one letter had a different version or had a different wording, and which one was most successful? And you can speak to your comms team about the sort of language to use. Posters is good as well if you've got a brand and sort of like a, you know, recognizable colors or a logo or an icon or something. It can really help just build that brand recognition. So you're putting together, oh, I've seen this and I've seen this and I've seen this, and they're building up that they are starting to notice a pattern. And it's not just one method, they've started to build up the trust in your brand. Yeah, street banners, leaflets, flow charts, and pop-up banners. I would probably go back as well, think about here, you know, the different audiences, like, you know, kids, like what can you can do like a little energy crossword for them or something. It's something interesting and engaging. And thinking about how the sort of longevity of some of these things, if you're changing your brand, or can it last the whole scheme? I suppose what you don't want to have to do is end up doing like different versions of different posters for different parts of the scheme. You can maybe want to think about what's the long-term aspect of the scheme. If I'm going to put a poster up here, how long is it going to be, let's say, valid for, or does it expire? That's something to consider. You know, thinking about, does your phone number change? Does your email address change? But yeah, I think if you view something, you know, there's got to be, not to get to like marketing on this, but call to action, a method to contact you, a website to go look at. What are they meant to actually do? And really thinking the whole time about building trust. Face-to-face communication as well. So there can be bits that come out in this that you maybe might not pick up on a call or something as well, bearing in mind that some people really do like to have that accessible sort of face-to-face. It's good to offer that, as some people would just make me more comfortable. Face-to-face, so, you know, can you find out if any other events in the area are happening and how you can maybe turn up as like a guest speaker? There could be a monthly resident forum, you could be a speaker at that, potentially. You can maybe offer, you know, you might have a resident, like a tenant engagement officer that's more suited and more trained to doing like in-depth support for like a home visit. You could have a void property as a sort of show home. Meet the contractor events, you know, that can sort of address any sort of concerns or hesitancy people might have. That can be helpful. Any more face-to-face things? Yeah, I think just I would maybe make a plan of it all, because you only have so much time and so much capacity. If say you've got like 2 or 3 resident engagement officers, you might want to sort of plan a bit of an engagement calendar and look at, well, okay, summer holidays, there's a kids club here, there's a weekly resident engagement forum or a monthly one, and plan there and have it on it when, okay, the monthly newsletter goes out here, so if we're attending that event, let's work back and promote it here. Things like that. Engagement considerations now. So yeah, starting with why, I think just there'll be different motivations. I think, you know, lots of customers, tenants are really, energy bills are, you know, relatively high. People will be really motivated to save energy and save money. They might also just want to be warmer at home or more comfortable. They might have like a drafty property, or they may have had, I don't know, it could be now overheating in the summer. They might also just be very environmentally conscious and really motivated by that. So bearing in mind, once you're explaining retrofit, there's got to be some sort of appeal to them getting involved. So whether it's saving money, their house will be more comfortable, a bit of an upgrade, maybe they're getting EWI and getting a new render. There's different motivations, and it'll be different motivations for each resident. So being upfront and being no surprises. So explaining things like the PAS process and what goes on, and that you might not be able to guarantee a certain measure. They may have to have ventilation required. I think timescales is really important. It's just so that they know that it's not just going to be that someone comes up and does a survey and they get installation next week. There's a few different steps. Anticipating their concerns. So you can maybe send out some communications with sort of FAQs of sort of Is it completely free? How do I maintain this? Is a heat pump noisy, or kind of addressing some FAQs, or they might be on your website. But also sometimes you might just need to engage with them and understanding what their specific concern is. You might have to sort of get to the root of it, and it could be, I don't know, it might actually be like a hoarder. They could have some health concerns. They could be anything, could be something quite personal. So you need to be quite considerate and sensitive to having those conversations and understanding how you can really work with them to address that. Automated reminders. So, if you order a parcel or you got a dentist or a haircut or something, you get, these reminders to say that, your appointment is a week today. Please click here if you want to change your appointment and so on. These can be really, really simple ways to reduce dropout rates of a contractor going all the way to a property, for example, and they turn up and then the resident might say, oh, I didn't realise it was today, I can't do it today, or maybe they just don't answer the door. How can you reduce things like that happening? So it's just always thinking one step ahead. The automated reminders, are obviously a nice way rather than having to maybe tie up lots of your team's time and sort of making calls to call them and say, oh, maybe, and before automated reminders are really a thing, what would happen? Would you call them up and say just a reminder that your appointment's in? So they can be quite a nice way to do that. Multiple communication methods reinforces trust. So I feel quite strongly about this one actually, that we've got to consider this from the resident's point of view, that if I had a singular letter, I probably would be quite nervous to sign up to a scheme. Whereas if I've seen the brand, had the council letter, seen all the different promotions across my area, I would start to build a lot more trust in the company itself and the scheme, because you do need multiple methods of communication. Then it can be relatively hard to track which has been the most effective. So I said earlier, if you're doing letter drops, to track which postcodes have been most successful and so on. You can also do the how did you hear about us sort of method of communication, where you can have a list of, was it the newsletter, was it social media, was it a friend? The reality is with a lot of these schemes that it might not just be one method of communication that the resident has decided to sign up for the scheme. They may have been in a bit of a journey, they may have had the initial letter, then they've had seen the council newsletter, then they've seen a poster, and it might be that it's actually the final method of communication that makes them sign up for the scheme. So it's kind of come as a package. So I would bear that in mind if you're analysing stats on what you think has been the most successful method of communication, because it's more likely that it has been multiple things. A lot of us don't make decisions just based off of one thing, where some people do. Some people are happy to get the letter and just go straight to sign up, but bearing in mind it could be a mixture of methods that finally encourages someone to sign up for a scheme. Now we're moving on to developing your engagement plan. So your communication. So we've kind of gone through bits of this already, but it's really going through every single thing that the resident might ask. So really any FAQs they might have, and considering what you're going to do. So what actually is the campaign? How will you communicate it? So are you going to have posters, letters, social media campaigns, and in-person events? And when will they be? How are you going to do them? Are you going to look at a calendar and plan it all and have a mixture of events? Can you do one a week? When do the letter drops go out? When does the newsletter go out? What is your actual messaging? So probably what you want to do is make sure that the messaging is really really key. You're covering all the key things rather than having everyone call up and ask the same question because a key bit of information is missing. How are you supporting anyone with sort of additional needs? They might need to account for extra time to do more support for these households. What resources do you need? So sort of skills and training. There can be things like DBS checks, safeguarding, even just there's energy city and guilds sort of energy awareness understanding. You may decide that it could be appropriate for your team to go and do sort of retrofit assessor training or domestic energy assessor training, which would be, sort of higher level, but that might be that they're not going to go out and do assessments, but it's just really could be valuable for them to know some of the more retrofit technical sides of things. but as well bearing in mind that anything technical will need to be communicated just for anyone to understand as well. So resources required as well. It might be that you have a really high demand at one point and then it dies down a little bit, mapping out the different stages of the project to say that the first tenant engagement letter goes out, and then you're going to be doing these periodic visits, and then it might be that there's a bit of a gap and then it dials up again. So mapping out the timescales, mapping out how long you think an average sort of property engagement might take, how much time do you need to spend on sort of designing your marketing and so on. Probably budget as well, planning all the finances, getting an accurate quote for any letter drops, thinking about how many that you might want to do in a project, thinking about how many homes, if you're doing a project of 200 homes, how many homes are you actually going to have to contact to get that 200 sorted? What's your conversion rate like? Are you going to have to contact 1,000 homes just to get the 200? Managing sort of wait lists as well if you end up being oversubscribed. You also might want to consider lag times as to your first sort of phase of properties, and maybe only sending out your initial sort of letters to the first sort of phase, and then maybe if you've got phases down the line in later years of the project, is just to maybe hold off on the initial engagement with them so they don't sort of lose interest. What successful criteria? How do you know this has been successful? So you might want to have some sort of tracker and thinking about, feedback, sending out feedback surveys, thinking about has it achieved intended outcomes? Like, do they actually have lower bills or feel more comfortable at home? So part of this will be part of this sort of PAS checkups, but you may have additional checks you want to make as your organisation. And what else do we have? Engaging with all the local stakeholders as well. So we mentioned earlier, like Citizens Advice, Age UK, schools, health teams, GPs, engaging with them. So now we have the communication engagement plan here. So this grid can be a sort of way to sort of map how and when you want to do things. If you're taking something like a resident engagement as a whole concept, how do you sort of break it down, thinking about when you want to do this and how often? So you see here the asset manager is looking to send out a letter 3 weeks before, and that's going to have diagrams and the contractor's logo, things like that. Things like these are, good to check with your contractor on and what they're planning on doing as well. You might know in sort of previous other schemes, maybe sometimes installers want to use your organisation's logo but might not have checked it with you, or just to consider that as well, make sure it's all kind of discussed. And everyone's different roles, so if you're going to time when you're doing the letter drop, time when you're doing the meeting, and how they all link up, and thinking about also, people want a bit of lag time of when they've actually had the letter to when you can do the follow-up. You don't want to send out the letter on the Monday and sort of call them on Tuesday and say, okay, you've had your letter now, can we sign you up to the scheme? You'll need to sort of work back and think, I need to give them about a week just to sort of review it. They could be on holiday and so on. We do have some case studies here as well. So we've got Gravesham Borough Council, and they introduced their retrofit strategy, resident engagement strategy in 2022, and they did pre-engagement with the residents on how the measures might impact their bills. So I suppose that's something that could be, they're really, wanting to know what's going to happen. So engaging with them early doors about it. I see, had some sort of informal social events and to help engage with them. And then they completed some feedback and satisfaction surveys, and they found that there was like a 90% improvement in energy bills. Obviously, that's a really good news story. I think now people are maybe a little bit nervous to completely guarantee that you're going to have energy bill savings, because sometimes you can't guarantee it because the actual cost of energy could go up in the meantime, but hopefully you'll lower demand, and just to even explain that process with people. And I'm just going to close the session now. Bit of a recap, I suppose I can do, just to say that today we have talked about why it's important, the methods of communications that you can have in resident engagement, sort of the engagement considerations, so kind of hard to reach groups and different field poverty demographics, and then how to develop an engagement plan, different steps to take along the way, a little bit of a case study. Yeah, thank you very much for your attention.